My first memory of my dad is of him dangling me over a balcony about 30 feet above the ground. To understand why a man would dangle his own daughter from a balcony so high up, threatening to drop her to the ground below, you have to understand my dad, and that, I'm afraid, isn't easy. Thomas Hemmings, or Keith as everyone called him, was born in Ireland. He never knew his real father. Nan couldn't cope with a young son on her own, so he was handed into care of her parents for 8 years while she moved to England to start a new life. Then, when he turned 9, he was brought to London to join his mother and new husband in Hackney, East London. In his teenage years, he fell in with the wrong crowd. Mum says when she started seeing Keith, he was doing everything and nothing. Amongst the everything he was doing was drugs. By the time he was 20 and had met my mum, Keith had settled into a profoundly irresponsible lifestyle. Yet for a while he was very much in love with Jenny, despite his psychotic behaviour. He'd never had anybody that loved him as much as she did, and he'd never been able to love anybody as much as he loved her. But he resented Jenny for devoting her time to me, though Mum says he also loved me and was really proud of the baby they had produced. At that time, my uncle Christopher, or Chrissy, was a big part of my life. He was only about 13, but he was a regular round our house and he adored me. On Mum's 21st birthday, he said to her, "Why don't you go out with your friends, Jen? You've not been anywhere for ages. I'll be here and I'll look after Martine." Mum didn't hesitate. "Right, you're on." So off she went with her mates to the local pub, having told Chris that she'd be home by midnight. Mum returned to find our block swarming with police officers. Keith had snatched her daughter and taken her out into the freezing March night wearing just a nappy. Chris was hysterical. "I'm sorry," Jenny sobbed. "Keith pushed his way in. I tried to stop him, but he punched and kicked me out of the way and grabbed the baby. I didn't know how to get in touch with you." The policeman told Mum to think calmly where Keith could have taken me to. He then took Jenny in his Panda car, driving the whole night looking in likely places. They went to his grandmother's, to pubs, to his sister's. Finally, Mum thought it might be just worth trying my gran and granddad's house, and there I was, just as Keith had dumped me. Mum thinks he snatched me simply to hurt her. Then it dawned on her that he would now do things to me if he couldn't do things to her directly. The time had come to move again. Mum had endured endless nights where Keith would turn up drunk and hammer on the door. He'd even break in, and the police became regular visitors as a result. The crunch really came, though, a few months later. I was about 15 months old. It was a glorious summer's day. Some brightly coloured streamers Mum had hung on the door were blowing gently in the breeze, but the perfection of it all was shattered when Mum heard a knock on the door. It was Keith. He said he needed cash because he'd lost his job. She told him to go. He shouted at her to put me to bed, to get her clothes off and to go to the bedroom. She refused. He came over where I was sitting, picked me up and dangled me over the balcony by my ankles, screaming at Jenny that if she didn't do what he asked, then he'd drop me. Even though he would never have done it, it was a moment of uncontrollable madness. Mum was hysterical and screaming. Thank God she did, because somebody in the flats heard her and called the police. No charges were pressed. Back then the authorities didn't take domestic violence as seriously as they do now. Even my happiest memories of Dad are tainted by his thoughtlessness. I'd fallen in love with this beautiful red coat. I must have been about 4 at the time and had seen it in a shop in Dalston. It was a beautiful coat, there was no doubt about it, and one day Dad took me to the shop to buy it. I reckon my mum knew it was too good to be true for him to buy it, as we later heard his red-headed girlfriend had given him the money for it. A couple of months later, Dad took me out again. This time he promised Jenny he'd have me back home by 6 p.m. How easily he forgot such promises. By 2 a.m, I still wasn't home, and Mum was going frantic, ringing the police and everything. Officers were dispatched to try and find me. Now, Keith was a popular figure on the front line in Hackney. Strangers would stop to say hello when we went out together, but I still remember clocking sly exchanges of money and other packages. On this particular evening, Keith's popularity must have got the better of him when we joined some of his mates in a pub. It must have been a hell of a night, because at some point he slipped out and went home, leaving me behind. The police eventually found me sitting with a group of rastas at 2 a.m, all on my own. On another occasion, Keith forced his way in and fell asleep in the spare room. In those days he smoked dope, which he would hide in his sock. To her horror, Mum saw that I'd found the sock and was eating the bloody stuff. I had hash caked all round my face. Her shrieks of panic roused Keith from his drunken slumber. When he saw what had happened, he went crazy and, incredibly, he accused me of stealing his dope. Then the council rehoused us in temporary accommodation in Colchester, in a little Dutch cottage with a bright red door which was really nice. Again, it was no palace and it didn't have any mod cons, but I have fond memories of the place. All the while, Mum was working, doing whatever job she could get. She worked as a barmaid, as a cleaner and in Ratton as the jewellers. She'd started off just doing Saturdays there, then desperate for more cash, he persuaded them to take her on permanently. It was on a train from Colchester to London to see our relatives that Mum says I gave my first professional performance. I used to recite a rhyme called "The Elephant Goes Like This." I can still remember it today. The elephant goes like this, like that. He's terribly big and terribly fat. He has no fingers and he has no toes. But goodness gracious, what a nose. There were all these city gents with briefcases, bowler hats and umbrellas, and I sang to them all and did the actions. As I got off the train, people started leaving me money. Mum reckons it all started from then. In the summer of 1981, when I was 5, we moved back to Hackney to a housing trust place in Greenwood Road. We got to live in a maisonette, taking up the bottom half of the house, a nice front room and a proper kitchen, and we had the whole back garden. I remember getting my first bicycle not long after we moved in. One afternoon I carried it, all glossy purple and yellow, upstairs. Then, pretending I was a motorcycle stunt rider, Evel Knievel, I launched myself downstairs. Mum arrived just in time to wipe away the tears. I'd gone head first over the banisters and smashed my head open. I still have the faint scar under my left eyebrow. Of course, it wasn't long before Keith found out where we were and spoilt things. A typical unwanted visit would result in violence against my mum, though he never hit me. There would be a knock at the door. "Jenny, please open the door. My mum's really seriously ill," he would say. "She needs to see Martine. I'm in such a state of shock." Mum would open the door and Dad would hit her in the face without even saying hello. Apart from teaching me nursery rhymes, Mum had also taught me how to use the phone and had encouraged me to learn my name and address. The idea was that if Keith came round and tried to get in, I'd be able to phone the police while she would keep him talking at the door. Once Mum and I were chatting in bed and we heard footsteps coming down the path. It was Keith, of course, and as soon as he reached our doorstep he started shouting abuse and swearing, calling her every name under the sun, including names I'd never even heard before. I just remember lying there as Mum screamed, "Go away, Keith, leave us alone, I've got Martine with me." Then she whispered to me, "If Daddy tries to come in, you've got to go and talk to the nice man at the police station on the telephone." And then he started kicking the door in, literally smashing his way through it. I remember trembling like a leaf as the wood splintered under his blows and then running upstairs to dial the station and tell the police. The next thing I heard was this dull banging noise. I went down and saw Dad hitting Mum's head on the bathroom sink over and over again. He looked at me and said coldly, "This is what happens when you're bad." And he just kept doing it. I was just screaming like you wouldn't believe. The police arrived shortly afterwards, but he was long gone by then. Mum was rushed into hospital.